you'll see here I have a few additional pieces, so I went through how I accumulated all of these components in the previous video, and this set here were all generated by different simulation techniques. So we have a particle simulation, a liquid simulation, a hair simulation, and a fabric simulation. And I was just going to show you how you might use any number of these in any kind of combination as a base point for sculpting, and then how you might progress your sculpture beyond those base points. So any of these starting points is fine, and really I highly encourage a combination of these various starting points. For your assignment, you only have to pick one simulation method to use, and you don't have to use it here at the beginning phase. You could choose to, for example, put hair on the end, but I find that I love generating form with the particle and liquid simulations particularly. So I encourage you to experiment around a bit with that. But I'm just going to spend a second to conglomerate some kind of creation, and then I'll get into the detail sculpting. Okay, so I spent just a few minutes there conglomerating some of my concoctions into a singular object, and we're gonna jump into the sculpting process. You'll notice as I was doing that in the sped up part, I made copies and put them into separate collections, and that just allows me to keep extras in case I make a change I don't like or go really far and want to go back to a previous version. I have them here, but they're not going to appear in the scene or the render unless I want them to. So I encourage you to make use of collections and other organizational techniques you might come across in your work. But to get into sculpting, it's going to be really important to remesh, and you'll be remeshing often. And I've already joined all of these into a single object, but if you'll see, if I go into sculpt mode, you can still see that they have different levels of subdivision present, and that's really obvious here when I put on wireframe mode, where you can see that this is very detailed, but then these are pretty low poly, and we want this to be actually consistent for sculpting. So what I'm going to do is go into the sculpting tool here. So this menu is located here in the top right, this little tiny arrow next to the gizmo. If I press the N key, it will also bring it out, or you can click here. And while you're in sculpt mode, this menu here under tool will have your sculpting tools kind of pulled out in an additional spot for your convenience. But it also has this additional remesh feature, which is the same as the remesh modifier, except this one is always set to voxel remesh, and it's built into the sculpting tools, so you don't have to back out of sculpt mode and go into object mode to apply that separate modifier. And I'm going to actually start by hitting that remesh, and you'll see that it kind of gunked it up a bit. So if I go and look in the wireframe mode, though, it has consistently voxelized the model. Now I'm going to undo that because I'm going to press Control Z, because I lost a lot of detail in that. And I don't need a ton. I think I want a little bit more than this. So I'm actually going to decrease this to like 0.08. And I'm slightly looking for the fingers there, but it's not a huge deal. I'm going to be cleaning this a ton rather quickly. And just as a test to see how this one feels, I'm going to go into smooth mode, which is this smooth brush here, and I'm just going to see what happens when I smooth it out a little. that actually turns out pretty okay. So I think we'll roll with this for now. As we go through the sculpting process, we'll be progressively lowering this voxel size while always keeping an eye on the face count. Here we're still at like 100,000, so that should be totally fine. So now we have our rough form established. Now, a sculpture can take quite a long time, and I'm not expecting you to spend 12 hours on this by any means, but I do encourage you to progress certain aspects of your conglomerations. So one example I have here immediately would be to follow the lines that you create. And this is really obvious here where this arm is going into this geometry. So one of the things I'll actually do immediately is highlight that line, and I'll carry it through the model a bit. So I'm actually going to increase the strength and decrease the radius on that. And I'm just going to really exaggerate that line. Now, I've pushed that perhaps a little too far, but what I'll do is I'll just enter into the smooth brush and I'll kind of collapse that in just a bit. But I'm just going to spend some time working on that. And I'll be toggling between a few things. One of the most important aspects of this process is smoothing. So where you see stuff like low poly count, smooth it out. Unless you're going for a low poly aesthetic, it looks pretty bad and noticeable. So I really encourage you to at least smooth out polygons, obvious polygons. The other thing we want to look at are these transitional moments. So where one geometry is transitioning into another. And again, you're going to want to smooth that, but you also might exaggerate that, just like I was starting to do here with the hand. So between smoothing and exaggerating, we can go really far. Now, another quite handy brush is the clay brush, which will help me add material to this geometry as well. And I'm going to decrease the radius, increase the strength a bit more, and I'm just going to add some more of these kind of vein-like lines to this sculpture. And this is going to help give it a feeling of connection. I'm just toggling between the sculpt brush and the clay brush. You'll get a sense for what the brushes do as you start to use them. Now, what I'm going to do now is invert the operation of the brush, and I'm going to do that by holding the control key, and that's going to push in to the geometry. And I'm going to push in. So here I'm like exaggerating this ridge line by caving in the valleys on either side of it. When it comes to the point of adding additional detail, I'm just going to lightly step down the remesh. And this is going to give me more geometry to work with, so it'll be more sensitive. It will make your brushes more impactful at a detailed scale as you do this. For broader strokes, though, it's good to leave your sculpt at a lower resolution, as there's less topology. It can change faster in more extreme ways. So I'm not even close to being finished yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start using some texture brushes to add some larger detail moves that I can still respond to in the middle of the sculpting process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this Texture Properties tab, and I'm going to click plus New. And this is going to link me to my file browser, and I am going to add in a material. And I have supplied these same textures to you. These are some of my favorite textures. I use them all the time. These are my secret weapons, so I hope you can make good use of them. But all I've done is I've loaded in this texture, and I've gone into the specific brush I want to use it with, and go to Texture, and I've selected it there from the list. And now, when I click onto my geometry, you'll see that it is adding that texture to the mesh, but it is constrained quite drastically by the resolution of that mesh. So this is a 4K texture, but for me to really see that in action, I would have to decrease the voxel size. And so here I've decreased it a bit, and you'll see that the closer you get to it, the higher resolution this kind of stamping operation will be. But at the start, before we get super detailed on the sculpture, I think this is actually a fantastic way to just help you generate some of what your sculpture may turn into. So for example here, this is giving me a lot of ridges and valleys and kind of a patterning as a target I might adapt to. But let's see, I'm going to grab a different texture here, and it may just take it a second sometimes for certain textures to load. You'll see this one is a bit more subtle, so I'm going to crank up the strength on that, and I'm just going to get some kind of subtle beginnings perhaps. And I'm going to carry on from here.